From the cold waters of self-contentment we drift in one by one into its suffocating light and air. Structure becomes an element of belief, syntax and grammar a catechist. Their words what the beads say. Words come to our discontent. Thom Kubli is an artist and composer from Berlin, Germany. His installations and performances are multidisciplinary, blending elements of sculpture, sound, and conceptual approaches. In his own words, his installation pieces oscillate between spectacle and contemplation, exploring the boundaries of physical space and viewers' behavior by inventive use of digital technologies. Very grateful that you could make it to our little conversation, Thom. It'll be tough to speak about all your works, but I will attempt to put across some questions out to you, lightly touching upon some of your works, almost like a butterfly, which gently unfolds its restless wings on a giant flower, uncertain yet curious. I'll get right back into one of your pieces or performances of the longest ever played guitar solo record attempt. From what I get about the installation, since I haven't seen it or heard it, it's a spatial setup that was minimal with a notary there for the sake of record keeping, but otherwise alienated from the audience. And the attempt of the record takes place in a closed space where the performer and an official notary are situated. Visitors of the venue can follow the ongoing action through a spy hole in the wall. And the setup within the space consists of a small stage, an amplifier, a guitar, an office desk. That is unique, the office desk, and a time display. A video camera is also positioned in the room to stream the performance live over the internet. Now, ever since I started thinking about this piece of yours, I had to just think because, I couldn't see it myself. I've been asking questions to myself. And the thing that motivates a person to win a race or an athletic performance is a mix of motivations similar to what you get in trivial things like setting bizarre records. This is a quotation by Ian Robertson, a professor of psychology at Trinity College in Dublin. So, thus, setting world records is possibly for achievement, for power, and for belonging, or maybe to prove that a sense of recognition needs validation on paper. Is that what it is, this project of yours? Or what is it that your mind was looking to state through this almost parody of a piece? I'm so intrigued by this. I don't understand myself the value of a competition, or, I cannot absolutely understand, but this piece is very intriguing. Could you please tell us?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for this extended question. So I wouldn't speak exactly about parody, but I will come back to this later. So foremost, Record Attempt is a durational performance piece that toys with the idea of fame and public recognition. And of course, it also resonates with this bon mot of Andy Warhol of the 15 minutes of fame, which you more or less all know. So what I did, basically, I set a number of performative actions with more or less trivial character in a new context and let it unwind from there. So first of all, there was a musical performance like a guitar solo playing. Secondly, there's a performance of a notary that represents a formal legal instance. And third, there is the action of the audience as, you could say, as observers that being on site of the museum or gallery watches through a spy hole. And ultimately, everything is captured and streamed into the internet, accessible to an anonymous wider public. To give you a better understanding of how this was initiated, so the record was executed within a framework of rules that I defined before. Let's say how long you can play, what you have to do in order to keep up to the standards of the record, how long you can pause, how you can use certain techniques of playing. So that led to a highly competitive situation. And also, for the first time when I performed it, I did it alone, but then it was an open competition, and other guitar players or people that considered them to be guitar players could just join in and take on the challenge. So it was programmed as a spectacle, and as such, it was playing with also the culturally charged item as a rock guitar solo, which holds its own history in the music industry, and which might speak about individualization and self-fulfillment. And of course, the piece also questioned this through this ostensibly radical and competitive setup. And so the whole scene implied some ambiguous aspects that might lead to the idea that this is having kind of that satire aspect. So, for example, the quantification of parameters that originally referred to quality. So, in music, how can you quantify a quality? But if you look in the progress of artificial intelligence, you will find that these days a lot of algorithms head towards, for example, speaking about emotional content. So all this is put in numbers. So you could say this is a little bit like a precursor of this kind of ambiguous moment of how you quantify qualities that we used to refer to as not being quantifiable, right? Secondly, there is this kind of momentum of isolation because the audience was split from the original performance. And it is not normal for music performance to have the audience outside or excluded. At this time, this was kind of extravagant. Now, since we speak now, this is 2020. Now we speak in the times of COVID-19 and of course social distancing and remote access and remote meetings have become more or less like standard. But at this time, this was quite extravagant to separate the musical action from the audience, and this was due to the idea of the digital realm, how you can transmit something or make something accessible remotely to the digital realm, and what are the consequences of that. And then I also learned, and this also that had become a very important aspect for me, that the performance itself, as a self-exhausting and long durational experience, had a value in itself. And this I experienced after doing it for the first time, because I really said, okay, this is an experience. This is not just about the concept, but it is also an experience by itself. But I think we have to mention, which I did, that while we speak in 2020, so we speak in times of COVID and social distancing, and which tremendously changed the idea of physical contact. And so this piece, Record at Hand, that we speak about, it was performed initially in 2008. And then it was again performed in 2012 two times in Spain. The first time at the Laboral in Gijón, and the second time in the Marco, like the Museum of Contemporary Art in Vigo.
Yeah. I was reading one of your interviews, by, I think, Emily Zimmerman. That was in 2012, I think. And I am going to try and pull up what you said here. And it says, and you said, if someone tells you now, I want to become famous, it leaves a strange taste in your mouth. I love these lines. Yeah, it is very, very poignant, and it is very beautiful. It's very philosophical, and it's very ancient and very contemporary at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah. It is like the fact that you want to be remembered. How does anybody take it? That is the question that you have
Absolutely.
raised. Yes, it's very beautiful, and there's so much to think. This piece itself is almost like a book can be made out of this. Just this piece, So yes, I wish I could have seen it myself. So, but thank you. Let me go on to the next one. Next question that I have, it is about radio sense, which is described interestingly as the emotional and aesthetic impacts created by an incisive manipulation of media streams. From what I gather in simple words, that visitors move around through kind of like a sonic architectural space where spoken words and snippets of classical music and pop music become arranged rhythmically amongst diverse radio sets. Besides the piece or the concept itself, what actually pulls me in is also the initial illustrations that you shared of the project concept that tells us almost in a hieroglyphic manner of the abundance of shapes or images that move freely in your mind, very geometrically freely. It's kind of like, it's hard to describe your illustrations. It's almost abstract, and it's not quite, it's very mathematical. As you bring in the fragments of thoughts and perceptions together in a single piece such as this. So tell us about Radio Sands, how the spatio-temporal choreography of the acoustics is far more than just a configuration of sounds and concepts. Is it your search for artistic identity in a world where everything ought to be audible, ought to be recognized or tangible? Or is it for us, the viewers, the listeners, people like me, who must pay more attention to the fluidity or multiplicity of soundscapes around us, which is beyond the apparent materiality?
I just wonder which illustration you saw, because I don't know if I exactly find it, but there's several out there, and I think there was a like an early stage of the concept, which was which you still can find, and then there is a documentation of the radios. But from what you tell, it might have been the conceptual drawing or the conceptual mock-up of the thing, which seemed to be very symmetric and in a space, and also very minimalistic in the way it's set up. So maybe I start a little bit, go 2 steps back. So Radio Sense follows the idea that we are confronted with a multitude of information, and so being distributed on various levels that create our notion of what reality basically is. So this process is also linked to the physical situation we're in that moment. So do we walk through a public space while picking up some information from a monitor, or do we sit at home or in a park with our smartphones? And if you bend that information by having it filtered through a potent artificial intelligence algorithm, it will also affect your concept of reality. So this is the basic premises of Radio Sense. And Radio Sense makes this into what you call the spatio-temporal choreography, which is quite a good description for it. And because there are 16 radio receivers in space, and they are controlled by an artificial intelligence that analyzes the content of the whole spectrum of FM radio stations that are available at the local site. So in Boston, it would just work with Boston radio station. And the algorithm that works behind Radio Sense can make the radio select certain frequencies, and it switches them on and off if it decides to make the sound snippet hearable or no. So this partly happens in a really fast pace. So it might sound like you have a granular cloud or of bits and pieces of information that is roaming around in the space. So basically, Radio Sense derives from the idea of the sound collage, or generally from the idea of the collage, but it all operates in real time. And the selection process is non-human. It's not me telling the algorithm what to pick, but there's some parameters that, of course, I get the algorithm, but then the decision is up to the algorithm on what to pick and what to make hearable or no. And by being a sculpture or being an installation, it adds the momentum of spatial distribution, so you can walk through the space and the sound sources are perceivable from different situations or different positions in the space. So you kind of mentioned the reflection on artistic identity, and it might be true in the sense that I forwarded part of the decision making in this piece to an artificial intelligence, an AI. which speaks about the hybrid identity of an artist or aspects of intersubjectivity. And it also emphasized the idea that identity is rather dynamic, like a fluent concept than a static one.
Mm. Yeah. And what I sense from your works, in general, like all your works, if I just have to like think quietly, there are some common strands. One is like you love fragments, you love broken pieces, and you like to join them together to give them new meaning. That's something I see. The other thing I see is that you like poetry in forms, like your forms are poetics.
Yes,
Uh, yes, and they're floating, wordless poetry. So I wanted to ask you, I know you're a composer. Are you a lyricist as well? Do you write poetry?
Yes, I do. I do.
Yeah.
It's not like an official version, but I do this as a rehearsal. So I had the habit to do this every morning to get started with the day. I would write a poem.
Yeah.
And the liberating part of it is you don't do it for publication, which makes it very easy. So it just liberates your brain and your thinking, and it gets everything going. And it was just a nice practice. I still do that. But I also must admit that the idea of having fragmented pieces or bringing them together is something that kind of comes from the musical world, and I relate to that as I don't know if you're familiar with the term of granular synthesis.
Mm-hmm.
What granular synthesis means that you can.
Yes, I read about from your works. I know. I didn't know.
Okay.
Honestly.
So basically, it's that you can. It's a general approach that you can make things into smaller and smaller pieces and assemble them in a new way. And in the music world, this is very common. And I kind of coined this term for myself. It's called granular realities, which means that so many realities or so many reality constructions are circulating through the idea of information, media information, that you have the chance, or you can make this into something new, and you can reassemble this. It's a very musical thinking. I agree.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. It's very beautiful. I'm going to move on to the next one. This is about your sound art installation, Black Hole Horizon, which is described as a meditation on a spectacular machine that transforms sound into three-dimensional objects and keeps the space in steady transformation. I love whatever the question that you're sending out to the universe through this project, like what kind of relations exist between oscillating air, the black holes, soap bubbles, what effect does the sound of horns have on the human psyche, and what impact does gravity have on our collective consciousness? Like, tell us how you came around to even conceptualizing this uh, amazing project. And if I may ask, what role does the concept of fluid particles, of the forming and disintegrating of bubbles with this slightly errant aesthetic movements play on your imagination? The entire process of the simulation and the stimulation of this world of fluid implosions and these slippery fluid vibrations. It's very sensual, it's very imaginative, and it reminds me of the choreographies of either an ongoing canon of tumbling images in the dance of Louis Fuller, or even, D.H. Lawrence's poetry. So I don't know. It's a mixture of dance and poetry that I sense in this project. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. So I think when you mentioned the fluid particles, I think this is a little bit what I tried to describe before, with the idea to reassemble new granular pieces into some kind of new continuum. I think it has this absolutely, but it also has some kind of choreographic approach. How objects move in space, how they relate to each other in space, and how they relate in some kind of kinetic manner in the movement. Um, so basically, for Black Hole Horizon, at that time I was fascinated with the idea of the transformation of sound into material, and I was looking for medium that would expand in space and even would occupy larger spaces and transform them visually. So it was kind of a quite sculptural and architectural approach as well. And I came across soap bubbles, particularly giant soap bubbles, and I watched videos of performers creating these beautiful big objects on the street or in the woods or on the beach or something. And I figured that they serve as a spectacle and as children toys, but at the same time, they're also used for physical computing to approach very complex mathematical and physical problems, for example, as calculating a black hole, or also in architecture that have been used in the 70s by Otto Frey in the Institute of Lightweight Structures in Stuttgart to form, like he used soap bubble films to form very complex roof constructions. So I developed the idea to have the bubbles derived from a large horn, like an oversized wind instrument, and through that being pushed out in the room, where they could have a life on their own and cluster or roam around until they pop. So it led to producing 3 of these horns eventually, and which in action are fairly loud, and they create a spectacle that always iterates. It's never the same. And if you go back in art history, it's also nice to find. You'll find that soap bubbles have been a motif for mostly Dutch and English painters, and they were used as symbols for vanitas themes, and they represented youthfulness, but also basically the transits of life. And this might be due to the fact that with a soap bubble, you witness a whole life cycle of an object, from its initial appearance, of its lifespan, dwelling in weightlessness, until its disappearance, with almost not leaving any trace. And for Black Hole Horizon, this ephemerality, the timely component of soap bubbles, was quite intriguing, because it meant that it would reconfigure the spatial situation every second, and that was kind of a perfect match to the transformative character of the initial concept.
Yeah, this is very outstanding. I said D.H. Lawrence because the moment I was reading, about your work, because most of your works I haven't seen, right? So in person, so that one line that I remember always when I was young, that I used to always recite, is from D.H. Lawrence's poem. It's a very simple line. It says, "Oh, for the wonder that bubbles into my soul." So there's this sense of wonder, It's like almost a Disney image that is, that is washed with music and art and science, and some kind of like a vibration that should not be defined, because everything, if you define everything, it loses the meaning. So I think you like, for us, not to get every meaning out there, you want it to be floating and out there, it's very beautiful.
I agree that it's on the verge of Disneyfication, right? And you just in the right moment, you have to change course with the way you install it, with the way you work with the dimensions. But of course, it totally has that. It's almost too easy as an aesthetic object to work with it.
Yeah, and I sometimes think that have any of your works been like performed like a dance performance, or maybe you could collaborate maybe with the Merce Cunningham School, because this kind of gels in with Merce's ideologies of choreography of dance, that free movement of thoughts and poetry. So it has so much of potential to come across as a dance theater as well, this whole thing. So maybe Media Lab, they would always welcome, that's your second home, I guess, now. So yeah. I'll move on to the next one, and this is a very intriguing title, Float Think Tank 21. I kind of read this title several times. I'm like, what does that even mean? So but I'm sure you'll explain it. It will be difficult for me to set up a prelude for this piece with the listeners without you telling us about it, because other pieces I kind of read online and I researched a bit and I figured out stuff. But I think for this one, I must add, it seems to have a almost prophetic reference to this COVID world, where we as humans are being compelled to just go deep inside our sense of isolation, and this world of sensory deprivation, so to speak, just we're caged in this small world of ourselves. So share, please, how you conceptualized of this project and how, if you at all feel it is an allegory of the human predicament at this point of time.
Yes, let me start with describing a little bit. So Float Think Tank 21 addresses the theme of political participation and contribution, and the isolation aspect of this piece in the first place referred to the remote potential and effects of the digital realm. And he put out the question, where does political participation start or even take place? So the underlying premises here was the assumption that the process of gaining awareness over political items, even if it happens in isolation, is already part of the political participation process. And this kind of, let's say, thesis was emphasized by using a samadhi tank or saltwater isolation tank and let the audience enter the tank individually, one by one. There were individual sessions you could have. And while dwelling in a situation of sensory deprivation, you'd be exposed to some piece that triggers the idea of you're isolated in this tank at this moment, having this isolation experience, but you're still part of a larger political body. So what's your attitude towards that? And this was transported by some kind of a speech that you could hear underwater, because you dwell in these tanks, but you hear underwater in salt water, and you kind of float. This is the experience of floating that you have in there. And this is what I put out, and it was kind of a challenge. Also, I knew it was a challenge to people because this was an experience in the first place that is quite exciting, and then to also get into this kind of awareness that with this kind of political dimension, it might be a lot to ask from the audience, but they were quite open to follow that to some point, and which was quite interesting. We had a book where they kind of where you could write your experience and record a little bit what you experienced while being in the tank, and there was quite interesting comments on the whole concept and idea of politics and what they experienced in the tank, because this tank is mostly known for psychedelic experiences. And relaxation, of course. And coming back to COVID-19, or the situation we have now, COVID-19 highly accelerated this tendency of isolation and remote participation, of course, and also challenges the possibilities of political participation. Looking at the election now in the US, and again raises the question, where does politics take place? Or how much is so bound to physical collective action, or do we progress into a hybrid of mostly remote operated participation, and what are the premises of that?
I think this was in 2010, right? This piece?
Yes, it was 2010, and we had it in upstate New York at MPEC for the first time, and then we brought it to New York City and showed in New York City.
Yes. If I may ask, what have you ever, like, I'm sure you know yourself, but what, maybe as a child, I don't know, what is it that prompted you to play with floating? Like, how does that thought come to you all the time? The floating, the silence, the darkness, the emptiness, and to make meaning out of weightless floating. That intrigues me. Where did it start? The process, the floating process, because I relate with it a lot. So that's why I'm asking you.
Well, I mean, like a flowing process is basically, in general, I would say it's a different state of being. And I'm interested in, like from an artistic perspective, I'm interested in a state of exception,
Mm-hmm.
which is a political concept, also philosophical concept.
Okay.
But it's also the situation of being in a totally different state as the one you're conditioned
Mm.
to be in a daily pace. And I would say floating is the most exceptional situation you get yourself into, because we are conditioned unawarely of being kind of drawn to this big magnet, which is the Earth.
Mm.
And we don't even share an awareness of that it is the way that we have to kind of arrange ourselves with this kind of gravitational forces of this magnet we live on. And saying that dwelling in weightlessness will be like the most otherworldly situation I could imagine. Getting rid of this kind of condition or conditioning that we have, and so it's I'm interested in this kind of environment where you encounter a situation that is kind of a state of exception, basically.
Yeah, I'll tell you quickly why I relate with it. Personally, that floating, that sense of like zeroness, that, the kind of like an enso feeling where it's like, yeah, personally, for me, I always, when I was a child, I used to feel alienated from the rest of the world. I would go in a situation, I'm with friends, and I seem to be there in the moment with them and not quite. So I, for me, that was what I related with this. It's like you're there, with the rest of the world, and you're not quite. You don't belong to this moment. You belong, and yet you don't.
Yeah.
That's what I got out of this from my own personal experience.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's very beautiful. There's so much to talk about this. I'll just go to the next one. Vasily Kandinsky believed that shades resonated with each other to provide visual chords and had an influence on the soul. And he said, as we all know, our hearing of colors is so precise. Color is a means of exerting a direct influence upon the soul. Color is the keyboard, the eye is the hammer, the soul is the piano with its many strings. In your project Monochrome Transporter, crackling sounds emanating from speakers seem to directly translate as barely visible bursts of geometrically shaped patterns on a suspended blue screen in the middle of one room. I just read out this description that we have online. Were you ever influenced by Kandinsky in this piece, or for even if he was deeply inclined towards, as I see, he was also deeply inclined towards the color blue. He said once, the deeper the blue becomes, the more strongly it calls man towards the infinite. So, or is it more of a sensorial journey for you? Like, how did you come about the same things? I still, your pieces are so different from each other. So I come back to the question: how did you think about the project, and what does this mean to you?
Yeah. So yes, I mean, like Kandinsky kind of made this relation to this kind of the spiritual and really cosmological link towards the colors. And I think I have an obsession with this color, or I had it even stronger at this time. But this also stemmed from the fact that what we intrigued very early on was the phenomenon of synesthesia. Because I encountered this quite early in my life, and I was looking into artistry and the idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, which mostly brought me into the art world, coming from music. And of course, Kandinsky and Franz Marc, the Blaue Reiter, was like a big theme there, because they pretty much try to relate sound to image and to colors. And Yves Klein's obsession with the color blue was, of course, famous. And later, Derek Jarman, for example, made his very poetic film Blue, and artistically charged the color in a new way. So Monochrome Transporter was conceptualized as an immersive sensory experience in sound and in image that was dedicated, or was a dedication to the color blue. But it also operated with the clear awareness of an artistic inscription over the centuries, as all the materials that I used, film and sound, were taken in small particles from these reference pieces. And there you have this kind of assemblage of small particles again, of this kind of fluidity phenomenon. But they were just algorithmically assembled in such quick pace that you wouldn't recognize the original sources anymore. So it provided this kind of oscillation between a pure sensory experience, which was kind of also described by Kandinsky, and I would say admittedly very subtle resonance of the particular cultural inscriptions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's. I wish I could see this project. Now, finally, calmly, I'm going to settle down on this most recent remarkable project of yours. I actually follow the tangible media, and that's where I found out about orbiting, and that's where I started working towards understanding your works. And I love the title orbiting, and so I'm going to read out a few, texts that I collected as I was researching for the listeners. Yeah. And from what I have read from the little research, that it is a speculative machine and has been described as a 3D printer that can produce ultra lightweight floating sculptures. And they describe it like, what Kubli imagines is a floating choreography, the sculptures floating towards and caught in a thermal steam, slowly circulating in dreamlike kinesis before finally falling down to earth. So I love, again, this floating choreography and how it possibly stands for freedom from regular norms, and just the need to find meaning in the void, and constantly losing forms and then regaining them, losing ideas and then regaining them. And some of the words that float around in the head as I think of the project are weightlessness, flight, transcendence, movement, choreography, oscillation, rotation. The endless is endless. So besides telling us as much detail as you possibly can about orbiting, please also share. I've been also watching the videos, by Hiroshi Ishii, and where he's trying to explain about the project, and he speaks so clearly, so it was pretty easy to understand what he's talking about. I just live across the Media Lab, and yet I couldn't see orbiting. Please tell us about, there's a thematic semblance in many of your projects, this perpetually looking for meaning in the workings of the cosmos itself, the elemental circlings, or in Hindu mythology, it is the serpent biting its own tail. It is an emblem connected or associated with the Mercury and Saturn to signify nature's fluid transmutations, the light and the dark forces that are trying to regenerate. So this project seems to celebrate so many things, including our cosmic realities. So I know it's going to be hard for you to say everything about the project, but how was your experience at MIT and the incredible collaborations that you formed while there, and how were you able to, form this incredible team? When I think of the team, there's a unique team of all kinds of people there.
Yeah.
So how was your experience there?
Yeah, so orbiting became a collaboration with Professor Hiroshi Ishii from the MIT Media Lab, who is part of the Tangible Media Group. But as you put out, it also comprised interactions with other departments at the MIT, as the Department of Material Science, the Mediated Matter Group, or also the Space Exploration Initiative. So it's based on an interdisciplinary approach. And this is mostly due to the technical and physical challenges that its realization brought along, and we figured out this pretty quick. So it quite enhanced the process of scientific and artistic research. And maybe I quickly share the original idea of orbiting. So the central element of orbiting is a machine, like a 3D printer that prints hollow objects with an ultralight material. And in a second step, these objects become filled with helium and ascend towards the ceiling of the room. Once buoyant in the upper realm of the site, they are caught in a thermal stream, which lets them orbit around an imaginary center. So they kind of engage in a continuously changing series of celestial movements, like an aerial choreography. And these objects are printed in the shape of modernist architecture, monuments, contemporary sculpture, as well as spaceships, satellites, smartphones, and all manner of material culture. So it's replicas of real-world objects as we might know them from the collective archive of postmodern imagery, and they're kind of deprived of their gravitational force, and through that can transcend the physical limitation of gravity. So the scene of this long track of floating and slowly orbiting objects might resemble the imagery of the space debris or the Pacific trash vortex, but at the same time, it acts like a pantheon of things, like a last resort. And it's still dynamic. It's an always changing choreography of relationships, mostly relationships between these replicated objects. And this is mostly the image that I intended to create. And maybe coming back now to the question why I'm interested in working with microgravity. As I mentioned, I'm much inspired by the concept of state of exception because it describes a moment when prevailing rules and premises are set out of effect. And through that, a moment of suspense and disorientation sets in. I think this kind of disorientation is very important. But also after that, a new orientation and renegotiation of spot. And I think this is for artistic practice, this is a quite valuable situation. And this kind of idea of state of exception is covered in depth by the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben, who laid out this legal and political aspect, particularly in reference to nation building and governmental items. So if you look it up, he published 3 books about the theme, I think in the 90s, till the 0 years. I think it's called Homo Sacer 1 and 2, and one is called State of Exception. It's quite worth looking into that. And to me, the idea of being exposed to zero gravity, your body being exposed to zero gravity, holds this momentum as well. Just think of the classic footage of astronauts dwelling in zero gravity for the first time. So they play around with their bodies, they twist along around their own angle, they throw things in space and they catch it back, and they basically explore the situation. And so it's kind of a joyful version, I would refer to of the state of exception. And I think basically this moment consists of more or less 3 phases. And there's a transgression of an initial state, which is being under gravity, and then you overcome it and you let gravity go, or you lose gravity, and then you get into this phase of zero gravity, and then you come into the second phase of suspense and equilibrium of disorientation, because you're not used to that. And the third phase might be this kind of renegotiation when you need to adopt to this new state and its potential and possibilities, and you start to explore it. So basically the question that it puts out is, what can we learn from this super dynamic experience? Because also, if you look at the world in many parts, the state of exception seems to be or to become a prevailing situation. But just coming back to orbiting and working with MIT, it was a great experience to work with Hiroshi Ishii and his team, and the task was to find and invent a super light material. And it was very adventurous and allowed to create, the material was thought to create intricate shapes and objects that we could get afloat, and also to think about construction principles on how to work with the material. And of course, we also researched into all the possibilities to construct a machine that eventually could automate all this process. So we came across working with a whole variety of materials, as for example with glass, or to create super thin glass objects, with copal, which is an organic resin, We worked with a variety of foams, and eventually with aerogel, which is supposed to be the lightest material in the world. It's a very intriguing material, and which created the most promising results. So it was quite intense and complex interaction between these disciplines and also between different groups of people, as you mentioned in the beginning, bringing together so many different perspectives that were necessary in order to reach an artistic vision, and also created a lot of, I would call it unconventional knowledge on the way that we gained through these experiments and testings we did at site. So it also was a quite rich environment, I would say, for the sake of the artistic research.
Yeah, and the way that you play with space and the relationships between the parameters of space, and the spatial relationships, the manifestations, the artistic matters. How were you able to, connect with the team at MIT, who were like all kinds of people were there, so Scarlett Tibbetts were there, and I think Lorna Gibson was there. I don't know. Isn't she the archaeologist, Lorna Gibson?
Lorna Gibson is from the Department of Material Sciences.
Yeah, she was there. So all kinds of people, like.
So we had a with Lorna Gibson, and we spoke about the material sciences and about the possible solutions for this kind of challenge.
Yeah.
It was super interesting because all these, each and every one of these researchers, specialists, kind of contributed a certain perspective, and even more overboarding information on how to possibly meet the task, and this was quite rewarding. And then we got ourselves mostly in very rich discussions. The initial contact happened through Black Hole Horizon, basically because I met Hiroshi Ishii at the Ars Electronica in Linz, where he showed with his team, with the Tangible Media Group, and he had his own exhibition at the Ars Electronica. And then I showed my piece, Black Hole Horizon, and I remember that he came with the Japanese delegation, and he liked the piece. And then I spoke to him and said, so look, we seem to have some common ground because we both like, we have an interest in the flashback of the digital realm into the physical world. We like to work with physical manner. And so we met there, and we said, okay, maybe we do something together. And then there was some time between that and how things go. We didn't hear from each other for quite a bit. And then I came to Boston for personal reasons. And I called him up, said, look, I'm coming to Boston, it would be nice to meet. And this is how things unrolled from there. And he just invited me to come over and give a talk to a student and to the media lab. And so I came and had a quick artist presentation for the media lab, which was pretty nice. And then we started thinking about the project, basically.
Yeah, that's amazing. Last but not the least, I would like to ask you. I know this project came about right at the onset of the COVID announcement, which came like a storm to us. I think in March 2020, I read an article in MIT News about your orbiting, and I was looking forward to it. That is it going to be on public display once things settle down a bit?
Hopefully, we still in a phase of sorting everything out, because the phase at the MIT would give us a range of solution of how we can capture it, but we could not resolve everything in the time that we had, because of quite a challenging thing. So we still need to build up on it and to continue working on it, which we will do. But I'm pretty positive that we will have it on display at some point in the future.
I've pulled up the news article here, and let me tell you, this is almost prophetic. Okay, this was when the COVID situation wasn't announced, and you said when somebody asked you a question, you said that You have to pick up the pieces and see how you make new relations with them, no matter what kind of quality they're holding themselves. So, and then you continue to say, even if it's super emptied out or meaningless in a way, you can still re-choreograph and make it into something beautiful. It's prophetic because after this COVID situation, I'm sure it's going to go away. Bye bye, COVID. Uh, after this COVID goes away, you are actually going to re-choreograph and make it into something different, and make new relations with them. So it's amazing that, you thought of this, you just said it, and that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yes.
Yes. I'm very, very looking forward to this. I'm sure. I don't think this year it's going to happen. This year it's like, well, everywhere.
It's quite difficult for this year. I agree.
Yeah. Only the seniors are being allowed on campus, and it's kind of like very, very strict. But I'm sure the students will love to see this, and so will me and everyone around here. So I'm truly looking forward to this, and I wish you all the best for your future projects, Thom. And thank you so much for making the time to come on my little podcast here and talk about your projects. I'm so honored.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Thom. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.